I wish we had some elevator music though, right?
Some background elevator music.
Background elevator music would do just great right now. If anybody's tuning in and this is your first event with me as a host, you'll know and you'll get to know that I'm very uncomfortable with awkward silences. So there won't be much today.
Yeah, put on the spot. Feel like I should interject a joke or something, but nothing comes to mind.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You'll get plenty of time to be on the spot today as you're the superstar for today's event. So okay, it's just 2 minutes in. I think we are good to go. So officially, welcome to our event today. My name is Eddie Casado. I'm the affiliate and technology partnerships manager at Convert.com. If you don't know Convert, we are a leading A/B testing tool in this space. We've been around for a long time and servicing more than 40,000 websites right now. I'm joined by Jason Haddock. I'll let you do the honors, Jason. Why don't you give us a little introduction before I jump in and talk about our rundown for the event today?
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Jason Haddock. I have been doing conversion optimization for about over 15 years. Been in digital marketing for over 20 years. I have been both on the agency side and both in-house. I've built programs from scratch and I've helped big programs mature, find a maturity model and mature their programs. So that's what we're here to talk about today is conversion optimization, and I'm happy to be here.
Exactly that. Jason is also one of our ambassadors, and this is one of the first of many series of events that we're going to be doing, hosting our ambassadors and thought leaders in the A/B testing space. So today, we're going to be talking exactly about conversion thinking. Is your organization ready for conversion thinking? How to assess and improve it? Now, this question might come up because you may be feeling some tension in your CRO program. You may be feeling a little bit of one step forward, three steps backwards. And Jason kindly enough offered to walk us through what is conversion thinking. Is your company conversion ready at all? And to give us some tools to actually assess where you are in this maturity model that he's going to be breaking down for us. So today the topic is conversion strategy. So Jason, to start with, let's just spend a little bit of time covering the basics. Okay, so what is conversion thinking?
Yeah, I mean, that's the crux of the whole conversation. Conversion thinking is, and we'll talk about conversion thinking and conversion thinking for business strategy. But to start with, conversion thinking is an experimentation mindset. And I love the quote from Shakespeare's Henry V when somebody comes up to the king and says, "Hey, the French are ready in their battle, and here they come." And the king says, "All things are ready if our minds be so." And I've found, as I've done maturity models for conversion optimization, that there are two characteristics that are more important than any other. And one is the mindset, how your org thinks and approaches experimentation, and the other is executive involvement. But this conversion thinking experimentation mindset, this is where a lot of programs go wrong, is they think about conversion optimization the wrong way. They think about it as a tactic or a way to prove out your assumptions or opinions or just a validation step. Whereas we're going to talk about experimentation is a different way of thinking. It's about exploration, discovery, pushing the status quo. And then you take that conversion thinking and you instill that into your organization and you instill that into your business strategy. And that's the hard part. So to me, we can get into more details, but that is conversion thinking in a nutshell.
Interesting, and it's resonating with me a lot because when you talk about growth, there's everybody will tell you that growth cannot happen if there is no alignment, right? And it feels like as if conversion thinking is also on that wavelength, right? If you don't have alignment throughout the multiple business units, and if not everybody's thinking about conversion as a business strategy more than a tactic, that's when things start to crumble, right?
Yeah, what happens a lot. If you're lucky and you're running a conversion program, you will have maybe one person that has the right mindset about what experimentation really is. And if you're lucky, you have that. A lot of organizations don't have that across the organization. So that's where, like you said, it crumbles or it falls apart or there's misalignment. How do we get that thinking the right way, not in just one person or team, but across the org?
Right, right. So if we were to talk about conversion thinking as business strategy, I know that you've built a maturity model and actually wrote a book on this. So I have the insider's notes here. I know there are four pillars to understanding conversion thinking. Can you walk us through what these pillars are and maybe give us a couple of examples for each so that we can, put the picture together for the whole audience?
Yeah, I think the four pillars are having that experimentation, thinking about experimentation the right way, being willing to be driven by the data, um, having the organization focus on customers, customer centricity, but also having them focus on the business strategy. So those are kind of the four things that I see in this conversion thinking. So if you'd like, would you like me to elaborate on each pillar as we go, or do you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
questions about? Yeah.
No, let's just spend a couple of a few seconds on each. Maybe draw some examples from your experience working on, because I think we neglected to mention your experience has been very very interesting. You work with FedEx. I believe you work with Disney as well. So you have the authority to speak about this. So why don't you just give us a few examples for each of these pillars where you think things have fall off or things could have been improved at some point?
Yeah, so problem number one is the experimentation mindset. And I see across the industry, a lot of people do not understand how to think about experimentation or conversion rate optimization. They think in terms of tactics, they think in terms of how many these things are important, but they get focused on how many tests we run or win rate or um, how do we validate our ideas or how do we, and what you need to change the thinking is this isn't just a tactic, this isn't just a validation step, this is a system or a methodology. So you have to start thinking like a scientist, asking yourself, what if, developing hypotheses and being willing to be wrong and willing to put yourself out into unknown paths to try new pathways. That's the experimentation mindset. Number two is being data driven. Um, this goes to, a lot of people will run experimentation programs, but I've seen a lot of times where they don't really want to abide by the data. The data will come back and
Hmm.
tell them something that changes their way of thinking, and they don't accept it. So, don't run a test unless you're going to abide by it. But you see that a lot. Are you data driven? Can you remove your emotions? The
Hmm.
third thing is being customer centric. And I'm summarizing these, we can go deeper on them, but being customer centric. Um, it's about understanding people. It's about understanding your customers' pains, needs, and wants, and how you design experiences around those. And not only how you design experience around those, but how do you challenge your assumptions around those things and really try new things to understand your customers better. And then all of this doesn't matter if you don't relate it to the business strategy.
Hmm.
And that's where conversion thinking as a business strategy is important, because once you instill it across the org and it becomes a part of your business strategy, it's not just a tactic or a step anymore. It is now a force multiplier. It is now a way for your business to adapt, overcome, learn, and progress in ways that, you didn't think were possible.
And I'm still thinking about one of the things you mentioned, Jason, about that you have to be open about being driven by data, right? And it's often the case, and in my experience, for example, I'm not as seasoned as I don't believe, the quarter of the audience here. I'm not as seasoned on CRO, but one of the things, and Miguel actually mentioned on our chat now that the people process technology point of view, the people component is the hardest one to nail down for conversion experimentation, right? Because it comes down to that that ego you mentioned, right? That okay, you want to run the test, but if it doesn't validate what you're thinking, or if it doesn't validate your idea, or if it doesn't push it forward, then the test is dismissed. And I think that's one of the issues when that you can, if you're looking for red flags. And I remember having this conversation with another panelist at some point during the Women in Experimentation event. What are the red flags, right, that you need to look for if you're doing um, conversion thinking as a business strategy? If you're joining a company that wants to put forth a CRO program, which actually kind of segue are into the what does conversion thinking look like in our organization? Can you draw some examples about what to look for to know whether there is conversion thinking as a business strategy part of the organization?
Yeah, I think let me go back to some red flags. Some red flags or an environment where conversion thinking will not thrive. Maybe we've all been a part of this. I've certainly been a part of this, but having been a part of organizations that sort of exist in fear. And this is where
Mm,
my second component, leadership, executive involvement, and their ability to drive culture and set the stage is really important. But if you exist in a culture of fear where you feel like you have to be right, then
mm,
experimentation and risk do not exist. Um, there has to be developed a culture of, hey, we want you to take risks. We want you to learn, calculated risks. We're not just going to willy-nilly throw things out there and really mess things up, but we want you to take risks. That's the only way we're going to progress and adapt. And there's organizations where there's the fear involved, fear for my job, fear for, my reputation if I don't put something out there. That's exactly right. And another red flag or another thing to solve in the environment is willing this humbleness and willing to admit that you're wrong. Um, a lot of times people in leadership and other places will be like, well, I know what good looks like. Well, I've been doing this long enough.
mm.
These are best practices, just do them. Those kind of attitudes also hamper or shut down conversion thinking, because now you're just looking now you don't feel like you can test an experiment and learn from it. You feel like you have to put things out there that win. Don't get me
Yeah,
wrong, this whole thing is about winning and improving things, but it's through the process of exploration and discovery and learning that we figure out how to improve things. But if someone is just putting out there, you know what, give me the wins, figure out the wins. If we knew what the wins are, we wouldn't be testing.
exactly. Yeah, and I remember getting, funnily enough, I remember getting that question. So how many tests have we that we've run have won? And that's when I said that this maybe we shouldn't be doing CRO at this point if we're having this conversation. But those are the things to look out for, everybody in the audience. So those are the red flags. But let's change the mood a little bit, Jason. What are the green flags? What are the positive reinforcements that we can get from an organization throughout, cross-functional, demand gen, SEO, absolutely everybody on the organization? What are the things that give you a good boost of morale, a good boost in confidence?
Yeah, so my most important thing is mindset. Second most important thing is executive involvement. If I see the executives involved, they don't need to be experts at experimentation. They don't need to know all of the data, the MDE, the p-value statistics, but they can drive culture. If I see them involved, and they're willing to instill or marshal the troops towards experimentation, that's going to be a big indicator of success. The other indicators that I see is when they start talking about and sharing learnings. So, we talk about data driven, we talk about customer research, but all of that is around the humility. We don't know. We need to figure it out. Here's what some of the data says. Here's what some of our research says. Let's put forth tests and iterate. Let's try something. Let's build off it. Let's keep learning. If that mindset and that kind of culture exists, then testing is not only going to progress and do well, but it is going to become valuable for your organization. I could think of others, but off the top of my head, those are two indicators that if I see those things, then I'm like, okay, good. Testing can be improved here and it can thrive here.
Good, good. So, Jason, let's say that. somebody is in a position in which they are having questions about CRO in general in the organization, is there a way to assess that mature? I know you've built a maturity model, and I know kind of the question is kind of self-serving, but I wonder, is it is there something, is there a framework, is there a series of steps that you can go through to run a maturity assessment for conversion thinking as a business strategy?
Yeah, it's kind of complex, and there's a lot of characteristics that we can evaluate. And I'll say right now, I've worked with some big companies that have run big testing programs, and nobody does it 100% right. They're good at
Oh,
some
that's a
things.
good note. That is
Yeah,
indeed a good note, because oftentimes from those that are sitting outwards looking in, you always think that the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons, the Notions of the world are actually doing this 100% of the way well, but it is often not the case. So it's good that
right.
you're mentioning that. Yeah.
And the key is that you're not only optimizing your website and channels, but you're optimizing your processes and your model and your program, and evaluating. So that's one thing you can look at is, do we take step backs every now and then, audit what we're doing, fix what's not working, lean into what is working. Taking a step back and looking at your communication. Are we siloed? Oh my gosh, everybody's got silo problems in their organizations. So, how do you break down those silos? How do we share information across teams? How do the teams collaborate? I was working with a company where I went on site and I interviewed, I think, about 30 different people that touched experimentation in one way or another. And
Mhm.
they were running a good program. But after our assessment and our suggestions, they actually moved people from one team and kind of changed their org. So I think maybe stepping back and running an audit of how your teams communicate and work together. Do you have the right people sitting in the right seats doing the right things? Those are some questions that you can ask yourself to say, okay, what's holding us back from experimenting properly, understanding properly, and start looking at, do we need people to do different things, or do we need more resources, or are the resources focused on the right things, or do our teams work at cross purposes to one another? Some of those things I think an internal audit for someone to, and probably an executive to look at and say, hey, this seems disjointed and convoluted. How can we streamline it? How can we optimize our program?
Right. Right. So the first step, let's say, if we wanted to break it down, right? So the first step would be to do an internal audit of how the organization is functioning in the context of experimentation. That would be, the first step, right?
Yes, and I would say maybe the first step when you do that audit is at the top leadership level, you need to have a good strategy for where the company is going, and you need to have good KPIs and know what success is going to look like, how we measure success. And then from there, you need to drive down to each team and say, are the things that you are working on, how do they relate to the bigger business strategy? And I guarantee sometimes you're going to find that this team thinks that this is the most important team, and this team thinks this is the most important team. And you find out that those are working at cross purposes to one another. And now you've got teams that are competing for resources, driving different things. So I think that the first step is, yeah, if you're going to do an audit, let's make sure that everybody is aligned towards the same higher goals, and then break it down to tactics and lower goals for each team. And then with conversion thinking as a strategy, those higher goals that we're trying to achieve, how do we experiment, innovate, and adapt to achieve them?
You mentioned something that caught my attention. Everything is obviously interesting, but one thing kind of stood out for me. You mentioned KPIs, and I wonder, knowing how difficult it is to work with data today, because we went from data driven, brought us to being actually data hoarders. And little by little, we've been moving towards this data informed era, right? Where we want to make decisions based on data. And now, with the advent of AI, obviously, it's becoming increasingly easier to digest data and come up with insights to a degree, to a very nice degree of maturity. But in the role of KPIs and doing this audit, I wonder, how do you go about challenging defining the KPIs, or even vetting whether we're measuring things the right way to actually move forward. Because I mean, if you're not measuring, you're not growing, right? So have you been in that tension in which they're measuring the KPIs, but they might not be measuring the right KPIs, or the KPIs they're measuring are not being measured the right way? Have you been in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, one that jumps out right now is I was working with a client recently, and the good news is they set up these metrics in their experiments, so they were there. But
Mm-hmm.
the test was kind of convoluted, and there was some interesting conversations that came from it. Their primary metric was begin checkout. Um, that worries me a little bit because checkout doesn't always correlate to, final conversions. And that was the case here. So they were also measuring purchases, but they were
Mm-hmm.
also measuring revenue per visitor and total revenue. And this was very interesting. The challengers, both one and two, both increased begin checkouts. Well, that's good. So we're getting more people to start checkout.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we looked at purchases, one was increasing purchases, but two was not. It was actually lowering purchases. So if we stopped at begin checkout as the conversion metric, they would have thought two could have been a winner, even though it wasn't. But then when we started looking at revenue per visitor was down for both one and two. But because version one was getting so many more conversions and purchases, total revenue was up. So this is a very convoluted story. So it goes back to the whole organization needs to understand if we have an experimentation mindset, what is our North Star metric? And in this case, for them, it could be revenue, total revenue, because that's how the business grows, right? So then
Yeah.
you look at a test and say, well, start checkouts is up, but in this case, conversion of purchases are down. And then in this case, revenue per visitor is down, but the other one had so many conversions that actual revenue is up. So now you know how to evaluate a test because if revenue is the goal, then you have a test result that says we have a way of increasing revenue.
This is a good example, Jason, because it brings me to a mindset of or a question of like, how do you, one of the let me just come back to it in a second, but one of the issues that I faced when doing CRO is that it gets very, very hard to contextualize data, because you have all of this, different scenarios, and the more data you have, the harder it gets to actually get to the bottom of the truth here. And the example that you're measuring is one of those common issues, I would say, in which you have a funnel, you have defined the funnel, and you have different goals throughout the funnel. But without the visibility of how people are moving through the funnel, you wouldn't actually get to the bottom of it. But I found that it's getting, or at least to me, it becomes so increasingly hard to find the truth behind a failed test, or find the truth behind a winning test. What are the things that we can replicate from the test to make it successful for others, for the business, et cetera, et cetera? And I wonder, do you have a go-to, um, I would say, do you have a routine to go through when you're analyzing, for example, this case that you just mentioned? How did you go through the process of vetting and getting to that answer of like, yeah, I mean, this test is driving more people to the checkout, but it's decreasing in revenue. And this other test is doing both at the same time, but not increasing revenue. So it's more purchases and revenue. So average deal size is lower. Can you walk me through that process? Like, what goes through your
Yeah.
mind when you're analyzing this?
Yeah. So one, I'll go back to say is your North Star metric. Your optimization program is optimizing towards one thing. And you'll hear people say all the time, but we have many different, KPIs. Yes, you do. And yes, we can optimize those. But you have one metric. You're optimizing towards one metric. You can optimize towards newsletter signups, but you always check against that North Star metric. So that's the first thing that you do is decide what you're optimizing towards, and that is your final metric. You can measure other things, but you're checking against that metric. The second thing is this is a sign of an immature program. But people will do post-test analysis and they'll try to fit the narrative. They'll get a result and then they'll say, but what about this? Look at this segment. And they're trying to find a win. So to stop that, before a test even runs, you define what the success metric is, what you're optimizing towards, and you define that, and then you design a test. And this is another fall down point for many organizations. You design a hypothesis and you design a test experiment that really answers that question. A lot of times they will design tests that they have a hypothesis, but then when you look at the test design, you're like, that's not answering the question. That's answering something completely different. So those are fall down points where people can start misusing the data or misinterpreting the data. So have your North Star metric, know what your success metric looks like, design a hypothesis that really speaks to that, and then design a good test that answers that hypothesis, and then finally be willing to abide by the results because you designed it up front the correct way. You feel confident that you can abide by the results, and then you iterate from there. What I don't like to see is the post-test analysis where people are like, yeah, but what if we look at it this way? What if we look at it now? What you're trying to do is you're trying to find a way to make it a winner or to make it fit a certain narrative. And that's not what testing is about.
Good. Very well put. Thank you, Jason, for that. I do have a question here from Vlad, actually. What is the most common symptom of a team optimizing for the wrong thing or metric, and how can you stop it early? And I think you just answered, but I want you to come back to it and give us an answer for this again.
Yeah, it's that proper experimentation mindset. I think the most common ways that I see people mm, optimizing towards the wrong metric is they're pushing their assumptions into the experimentation program. Maybe there was no customer research. Maybe there was no data that suggested this was really a problem. Maybe it was somebody's opinion and they threw out a test there. So now they get excited because they're moving the needle on some metric, but they never really evaluated, like I said up front, whether that metric or that thing actually mattered to the business at all in the first place. So then it becomes one, not such a great metric. Two, it becomes a waste of time and resources.
Right. Now, if we could just switch gears a little bit about, we've covered what's conversion thinking, we've covered what it looks like in practice, we've covered the red flags and the green flags. Now, if you needed to start a conversion thinking program inside an organization, we want to do CRO, and they come back to you and it's like, we're not growing in traffic and we need to convert this traffic at a higher rate, right? Which is the commonality of how in I'm not going to say in mature organizations CRO come about, but at least in my experience, that's been the common occurrence, right? We don't have money, budgets are shrinking. This is the traffic. It's not growing as fast as we hope. We need to improve conversion, which should have been at the beginning of the sentence, but it always comes back at the end. How would you go about instilling this mindset? You mentioned that word instilling, and it stuck with me. How would you go about doing that on our organization? What does stakeholder buy-in look like? For example, you've done it before, so are there things that usually come back and say, if I do A, B, C, and D, my program is most likely to get bought on or approved or what have you?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about the best way to answer that. So I'm going to throw some things out there. One, nobody gets a mature program overnight. There's not a flip that you switch and say, suddenly we're perfect in all these areas and we're doing everything well. So understand that this is a process and every organization and business is different. So what works as a program for one company may not be the right for another. So knowing that, there's going to be a lot of education and training across the org. So knowing what you're training for, knowing how to educate, knowing how to evangelize, and just kind of working with your org constantly to help everybody level up at the same time. That's going to be really important. The other thing that's going to be really important is that have a bias towards action. You'll hear companies say, you'll hear programs talk about velocity. And I'm a big believer in velocity. The more tests you run, the more you can learn. But you don't want to fall in this trap of just running tests for test's sake.
Hmm.
So there's sort of this leapfrog effect where I've seen people, right off the bat, let's get the process going, let's run tests, let's learn fast. And then there's a point where, and this is the maturity happening, there's a point when they kind of say, okay, we're running a fair amount of tests, but they're not great tests. So let's kind of stay where we're at. Let's focus on quality, do more research, better ideation, things like that. And then once the quality gets better, they're like, okay, now we're doing better. How do we increase the velocity again? And so you find ways to increase the velocity. And then at a certain point, you're like, okay, we're going faster, we're learning faster, but now how do we get better tests? And so you kind of have this velocity, quality, and that's maturity happening. So I would say that's part of it too, is a bias towards action. Get out there, start doing things. And then somebody like me, you hire an expert or you bring an expert in, they can shorten that learning curve for you. If you didn't have an expert, you could learn over time. But if you bring in experts, they can help you learn faster and mature faster. So I would say it's that training. I would say it's that velocity and quality, velocity, quality. And how can you shorten the learning curve by education, learning, bringing in experts?
There are two things I wanted to follow up on, Jason. You mentioned a couple of times better test. What does a better test look like? What do you mean? Like, how can you? So we talked about velocity, right? And then we talked, doing fewer things but better, right? What does that look in practice? I wonder. What form does that better take?
Yeah, better tests, better ideas. And this is a really tricky subject because people get enamored and infatuated with ideas. Bring me good ideas. Well, if we knew they were good, we wouldn't be testing, right? Back to that whole thing. But there are good ways of developing ideas, and a lot of it is customer research up front, data up front, like looking at heat maps and recordings and analytics and saying, okay, this problem keeps reoccurring. Um, and then more than a good test idea, I would focus on test themes. So if you find a problem with your product detail page, for example, and you find that people are not they're spending a lot of time on the page but not continuing to check out. Okay, that's a problem area that we want to optimize. And from there you have a theme. The theme is not just, fix the button or change a button color. The theme now becomes how do we increase people from that page, to checkout? Is it copy? Is it imagery? Is it button color? Is it button location? Is it even a problem on the PDP, or does it start way before that? Now you have a series of tests or test themes that you're going to iterate on over time. And that's going to make the idea better or the tests better. Um, a lot of times people think they need to hit it out of the park. What's the best test idea we can do right now to fix this problem? No, what are the ideas around this theme that we're going to iterate on, and we're going to hammer on it for a while, and then we're going to figure out the problem. I think that's the way to get better ideas or better testing.
Thank you, Jason. And I think you covered extremely well what that better looks like, right? It's maybe more depth instead of more velocity. It's just more depth on understanding the theme behind the problem that you're trying to fix or the improvement that you're trying to make. And I also have a follow-up question from Miguel, which is actually part of the question I wanted to ask you as well, is how do you prioritize, how do you boost confidence in the organization towards the program? Let's say it's a young CRO program, you're setting it up. And we talked about, you mentioned education a couple of times and getting this cross-functional alignment and whatnot. What are the things that you'd prioritize in order to get one, more engagement from the organization in terms of, okay, what are the things they need to learn, right? It could be hypothesis generation or interpreting the results of the experiment, or what experiments are, what experiments are in essence. And then the second part is, how do you ensure that you're getting, if not wins in the experiment, how do you build momentum towards the program so that you can boost the confidence in the program altogether.
Yeah, this is a hard one, and this is where a lot of programs die or flail or limp along. Um, I think it depends on the stage you're at. If you're a new program and you're just getting started, let's celebrate wins. Getting your first test launch is a win, right?
Yes.
Over time, fledgling testing organizations, they move slow. So finding ways to move faster or removing roadblocks and from idea to test launch, we've shortened that period. That's a win. Celebrate that as a win and communicate that across the org and evangelize that across the org. Um, there are ways to get people excited. I think communication is key. Not only communicating wins, we're here for wins, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
learnings, right? This keeps people involved. When I worked at Adobe, every test that ended, we sent out an email to all the stakeholders, and it always resulted in all of this feedback. What if we do this next? Why did that not work? And all this discussion. So to me, that was huge. That was engagement. That was people saying, "Oh, interesting. This is how the test ended." And then they started talking about what it meant and what the next steps were. So getting people involved that way, I think is really important. And building that momentum it's a muscle, so building that muscle of from idea to launch and sharing results and doing that over and over again, you get better at it. And then showcasing over a long period of time, hey, not all of our tests win. In fact, some people will say most of them will lose, but that's how you communicate that to the leadership is that, hey, this is not a bad thing. This is a learning. And, we're going to put out 100 tests. And if 80 of them lose, the 20 that win really move the needle and have helped the program. But we also learn from a lot of the losses. And that kind of communication is going to help people understand what testing is doing for the organization. I think that's key. I think there's a failure to communicate that a lot. And so people wonder what testing is doing. And then, they cut it when they don't see anything.
That line resonated with me a lot because I remember reading, maybe people in the audience came through this post as well, but there was this post going around on LinkedIn from a guy that had hired a head of growth, and the head of growth had been there for like 10 months, and they had not seen growth in his early stage startup environment. And the CEO was asking, how do I know if I have the right person or not? And one person came back and said, like, if you ask your head of growth the learnings from everything that they've been testing all along and they come back at you empty, that's when you know you have the wrong person for a head of growth role. So it does sound very similar to what you're explaining right now, right? It's not just about like testing velocity, how many tests are winning or losing. It's more about your ability, and this goes back to Miguel's question, is your ability to communicate the value of the program more than communicating the results of the program, right? So the inherent value of the experimentation or conversion thinking is that you are testing things out to the betterment of the company, and that betterment not necessarily is equal to more revenue. It could be equal in improvement in efficiencies in operation and logistics, and cutting some unnecessary steps in some processes that would get people freed up in time to do other stuff, right? Which is also part of that experimentation conversion thinking process is how do you put people in situations of success towards the improvement of the company and the improvement of the result. So it's just not test, if I'm getting it correctly. At least the way I'm seeing it is just
Yeah.
conversion thinking is not just about thinking about
No.
conversions. It's a culture shift, right? It's a cultural
Yes,
shift.
it needs to be steeped in your culture, and I think you bring up a really good point. This goes back to experimentation is a methodology. It is a way of discovery. It is a way to adapt and overcome. Let's face it, AI is disrupting everything from SEO to product management to copywriting. Your best bet right now in this world that's in upheaval is experimentation is a way to figure something out, to adapt, to learn, and overcome. So having the right person in place to do that, yes, let's measure our win rate. Let's measure our velocity. These are good KPIs to look at. But the right person is going to be able to communicate and say, this is a methodology. This is not just a test, but this is our force multiplier. This is our differentiator against our competition. We use this methodology to figure things out. And if it's steeped in your culture, it's not just about improving conversion rates on a website. It may change the way the product team thinks. It may change the way the go-to-market team communicates. That's when you know the impact of conversion thinking in the org is happening, is that it's influencing everybody's learning and it's influencing all of these motions, and they're getting better from the learnings from the data. And as you learn, the wins are going to come.
That is exactly it. That is exactly it, Jason. So, Jason, we've covered, I think, extensively edge case use cases. Sorry, for conversion thinking. Some of your experience as well from working at Adobe. Some of the red flags, green flags, again, of organizations when it comes to CRO and experimentation programs in general. And we did promise a few people, some of our attendees, some takeaways or tactical advice. And I want to bring it back to fulfill that promise. So let's switch gears a little bit from the conceptual sphere into more tactical. Let's get a little tactical. So I have one of the things that we promise people to learn is how to evaluate team alignment, decision making, and culture through conversion thinking lens. If you had to give us 3 tips to do this effectively today, let's say Miguel is it looks like if Miguel is on a young experimentation program. So what advice can we give Miguel and the rest of the audience to assess this team alignment and decision making and culture?
Yeah, the question I would ask for a young fledgling program is experimentation the responsibility of one person or one team right now? And if that's the case,
Interesting.
ask yourself if that's the case, then do the other teams even care? Are they involved or do they not care? And if they don't care, you'll see things like where you go to them and say, hey, we should, test this or we should experiment on this. And there's resistance, and they can resist because the leadership hasn't instilled that conversion thinking into the culture. If they can resist, then you've got a problem because now testing and experimentation exists in one team. You try to roll it out and work with other teams, and they're like, no, we don't need to do that. So that's one thing I would look for. And honestly, I've been there, and in a lot of what conversion optimization people do is they have to break down silos, they have to communicate, they have to figure out how to partner with stakeholders, and it can be tough. So I would look for that as one thing. Um, I'll go back to the ideas versus themes. Another step that you can do as a fledgling organization is people can get excited about it. They want to be involved and they throw out a ton of ideas, and your roadmap is just full of ideas. But don't test an idea, learn from it, and then jump off to another place and test an idea and learn from it, and then jump off to another place. Stay focused and ask yourself, are we focused on we found a problem in this checkout flow or on this page or in this channel? And we've come up with a test theme. And so that generates a dozen of test ideas. And we're going to stay disciplined and we're going to hammer and iterate on that theme. And that's how you're going to get improvements. But if you're jumping from here to there, that could also be a sign that you're kind of missing the point or not getting as much out of it as you could.
Jason, I wonder, is there a right time? Are there signals for the right time to do conversion thinking? Are there things that are companies that evolve with time? How can we identify those companies that are ready for that? Like, let's say you're coming into a job, and again, it reminds me of this conversation I had at our previous event in Women in Experimentation. This person was telling me that he was brought in to do CRO, but he was the only one doing CRO in the company. That to me was already a red flag, but he still took the job, right? And I wonder, is there a right time for this?
I don't know if the right time is the right question. It's more of, is there the right environment for this? I think the right time is now. Honestly, and maybe this is my bias from doing it for so many years, but every organization needs an experimentation program. Like I said, it's a force multiplier, it's a differentiator, it is a way, think of it as R&D. A lot of the big
Hmm.
companies had research and development, and that's how they stayed on top, and that's how they innovated. Well, this is like R&D for your marketing, and everybody needs that. It's a way to stay innovative, it's a way to beat your competition. So instead of the right time, I think you look for the right environment. Do we have the right people? And this is the conversion thinking as a strategy. If it's not there and the environment's not there, how do we go about instilling it? Where do we start? I go back to executive leadership. If they can get the vision of that and you have the vision, work with your executive sponsor as a champion, say, this is the vision I have, and then see if they can't help the environment to grow and the culture to change. So the time is now. I think the key thing is, are there the right, is it the right bed to plant the seeds?
Mm, okay, I think that's a good way to turn around the question, and definitely um, understand that I would agree with you that the time to think conversions is yesterday, if not now. I think it's again a force multiplier, but sometimes environments are ready. They think are ready for conversion thinking or for an experimentation program because that's the next thing, the next shiny thing they found somewhere. But they truly aren't ready, right? For that conversion thinking to actually happen and to drive meaningful change. Because then you end up like this person that is just the only person doing CRO in the company. I I I think that's one of the issues that dooms experimentation programs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's tricky because I go back to that bias towards action, right? Even if the environment is not perfect, but you have a foothold, you're just the one person doing it, do it, right? Show success, evangelize, communicate, and build it
Communicate,
from the
yeah.
ground up. I would say the executive leadership being involved is going to push it from the top down, but it's a longer grind, but you can also grassroots build it from the ground up. So I would say, I don't think anybody should say, is the environment not there for experimentation programs and conversion thinking? No, it's not there, so we shouldn't do it. The question is, we should do it. How do we get there? What do we
How do
need
we
to
get
fix?
there?
What do we need to change? Yeah.
Okay, good, Jason. We are 10 minutes away from finishing our webinar today. I do want to take some time to thank you, Jason, for all the effort you've put into the promotion of the event and for entertaining some of my craziness as well, to promote it and being a good sport. And obviously, hearing you speak about conversion thinking as a business strategy is also very, very inspiring. And I'm hoping that a lot of people in the audience or some people that get to see this tomorrow also find that inspiration as well to drive change and to drive experimentation forward. So I want to thank you for that. Before we move on to any QA questions, I do have some QA questions here for you. Um, there's one aspect of experimentation programs and CRO programs in general that often go unnoticed or undervalued, which is QA, right? So we didn't stop to think about QA within conversion thinking, the conversion thinking framework. Is Are there specific footnotes that you would add to QAing experimentation programs? And also, is it always about data quality or is it also about the decision quality? Those are the two questions we have from the audience right now.
Yeah, from a QA perspective, this is what I think, and this goes back to, it's instilled in the culture and everybody's thinking about it. Some organizations will throw it over to QA to make sure it's not breaking anything or to check that the data is coming through correctly. But what I've seen, and I've been a part of programs where we include creative, we include the copywriting teams, other stakeholders into the QA. And what that does is that gives a different lens. Your developers are looking at Does it work in all the browsers? Is the right metric being passed through and are we capturing it? But then the other QA stakeholders are like, is this the right experience for the customer? Does it feel right? Is it behaving the way that we designed it to be? Um, and then the other stakeholders may just be looking at it and say, is this the right thing to do? Like that should happen before, but just checking. So I think involving those type of people in QA, one, it's the conversion thinking across the org. They should all be involved and worried about it. But getting those other stakeholders involved looks at the experience, not just from a technical perspective, not just from a data perspective, but overall, is this within brand? Is this the experience we want people to have? So um, QA is a big part of it. The other problem is how quickly can we move through QA without, missing some things? So we can be very meticulous and cover everything, but that might slow it down. Or we can move so fast that we miss things and then we put out bad experiences. So finding that balance, I think, is key.
Great. And the follow up to the next question would be we talked about the data quality briefly, about auditing the processes and knowing where KPIs are being calculated, how they're being calculated, and whether or not the results that we get from an experiment are valid, so to say. But is it also about decision quality? Like when it comes to, have you been in situations in which you have a roadmap of experiments and then you rise it or ice it, and then it's not the right decision? I believe you touched up on this briefly earlier, but I want to know decision quality. Is it one of those aspects that you work on through conversion thinking?
Yeah, I think the key is you have a roadmap and you should have roadmap review with your stakeholders. Um, you don't want to get ready to launch a test and then have somebody within the org be like, what is this? I don't like this. This is not what I want, right? So I think having a roadmap review with the right stakeholders up front and say, these are the tests that are coming up. This is the design. This is the hypothesis. This is what we're doing. This is how we measure success and the KPIs. That's going to help everybody, get the buy-in up front. And then you mentioned the data quality, right? This goes to, do we have the right implementation? Do we trust the data? It's funny how many orgs I've been in where you run a test and then people start questioning it. Like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that result. Like they question the data. Well, let's
Mm.
make sure our implementation and data capture and everything and data literacy up front is done well so that people understand what they're seeing and they have trust in it so that when you do run a test, everybody's like, well, we trust the data and we trust the implementation, so now we're going to abide by it. So I think those two things help.
Jason, we are 5 minutes away. I want to give you some time to, where can people find you if they want to speak about conversion thinking, if they want to essentially engage with you in terms of business? Where can they get in touch with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Jason Haddock, but you can also contact me through my website, which is fastarcher.com. And yes, I would love to, if you need help taking your program to the next level and finding out what obstacles or roadblocks you have to growth right now, let's talk. I'd be happy to do it.
Thanks so much, Jason. I think that covers our program for today. So I want to thank you, Jason, for entertaining us with conversion thinking and bringing us some insights from your experience working with Adobe, Disney, and FedEx, and what have you. So I really appreciate your time. And if you need to talk to Jason, you can do so via LinkedIn or through his website, fastarcher.com. And if you need to talk to me, you know where to find me. I'm pretty much everywhere on LinkedIn and so on and so forth. If you're interested in joining our affiliate program, we are taking applications right now for our ambassador program. And that's how we call it, because we're looking for people like Jason that are furthering experimentation knowledge and available to make this the industry that we all want it to be. So if you're interested, hit me up. You can also check out Convert.com if you need any A/B testing solutions. I believe that, Jason, you do have you do have an offer, right? You have an extended trial of A/B testing that you can hook the audience with. So if you need that, you can talk to Jason. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. I hope to see you around the next event, and have a wonderful rest of the week, everyone.
Thanks, Eddie, for having me.